What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some sell high players heading into week 11 of the NFL season. So these are guys that I just think have kind of reached their peak in value, maybe coming off of a big game, a few big games, in previous weeks, but, for whatever reason, I think these guys are probably going to be trending down rest of season, and this is a good time to maximize the value. While you guys are watching, if you enjoy the content, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. As always, any questions, drop them down below. But let's just jump right into the first sell high player. And I believe I actually talked about Raheem Mostert last week also, but I think he's kind of set himself up here with another solid week to sell high. Honestly, maybe even a better week to sell high than last week, because I think he didn't actually have, a great fantasy performance in week 10 or in week 9. But here in week 10, he goes out, has 18.7 PPR points, 8 carries, 65 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 receptions for 22 yards. So if you're looking at that, point per game number or, the specific 18.7 this week, you're probably thinking like Raheem Mostert has a strong role. He's going to be a solid option moving forward. But Jeff Wilson came in here. He dominated the production. He dominated the opportunities. And he dominated in the usage department. Jeff Wilson came out, scored 22.3 PPR points, had a 61% snap share. He out-targeted Raheem Mostert 5-4, also ran significantly more routes than him. He also out-carried Mostert 17-8. So we saw Wilson dominate the usage basically in every single area except for the 2-minute drill, which they basically split 50-50. I think it was like 4 snaps to Mostert, 3 to Jeff Wilson. So in Wilson's just second week with this team, he has established himself as the number 1 running back here. I think they may stay in this sort of like 65-35 split rest of season, but this is definitely going to be Jeff Wilson's backfield barring a significant change, and Wilson has looked good, so I don't really see, why they would go out and kind of change this thing up here. So right now, I feel like Mostert probably at best is going to be a weekly mid-tier running back 3 play, right? Like, we're not going to be in game scripts like this where they're going to have, the luxury of running the ball a ton. They're likely going to be a pretty pass-heavy team in most situations, and getting the 35 side of that 65-35 split is just not someone you're going to be wanting to start in your lineup. So I do think this is a great opportunity to move off of Raheem Mostert. If you were unable to trade him last week, maybe you just couldn't move him or you decided you didn't want to. I think with all the information we have this week, Jeff Wilson building on that role, Mostert having a big fantasy day, I truly think like this is the opportunity. I don't think you're going to get a better chance than this to sell Raheem Mostert at this, current price. So I would be moving off of Mostert. Another running back that I would be moving off of at this point is Devin Singletary. He's kind of been a weird player to evaluate because when you're looking at him week to week, his weekly usage is very strong. He has a great snap share. He takes a pretty solid percentage of the team's carries. He's very involved as a route runner. Like, his route participation is great week to week, and it just doesn't lead to great production, especially on a top offense. Like, if you're telling me he has great usage, he runs a ton of routes, he's on the Bills offense, one of the highest scoring units in the league, you'd probably think this guy was like a borderline running back 1, if not like a top 10 back. He's averaging 11.3 points per game on the season, but he is coming off of a 15.7 point game where he scored 2 touchdowns in the Bills' loss to the Vikings. I just think he's in this weird spot where I'm not seeing him, consistently put up this solid workload. They don't really like to, grind the ball out on the ground. And even though he's running a ton of routes, like, he's had a few games with solid receiving production, but it does seem like instead of checking down, Josh Allen is more willing to, scramble, use his legs, which I think does make sense. And then you also just have the potential that he does lose work. Like, if he's not giving you top 24 production while having this, really solid role, what happens when they start to give some more work to James Cook or start to integrate Nyheim Hines, who they went out and traded for? I just think, there's some room for Devin Singletary to basically become unstartable. And so I do think this is a good opportunity to kind of pivot and tier up to like a mid-tier running back 2. So I'm not saying you're going to get that straight up for Singletary, but Singletary plus like a bench piece to kind of tier up to another running back, or include him in a big-time package to get a significant upgrade. But I would be looking to move off of Devin Singletary. Now, to the wide receiver position for these last 2 players, I'm going to be talking about Gabriel Davis. And I talked about Gabe Davis as a trade target last week, someone I was buying low on, and now I think there's an opportunity to sell here. And so the way I'm going to kind of frame this is that if you went out, you traded for Gabe Davis, I don't think this is a spot where you need to trade him. And I'm not saying like I urgently want Gabe Davis off of my team. But what I do want to remind people is that this is the same player we had last week. Just because he's coming off of a big game does not mean that Gabriel Davis is a different player. If you were someone who had him on your roster, he was coming off of a few bad games in a row, and you were done with him, you wanted him on your bench, your mindset should not totally shift after this one game. If you were done with him, you should probably be selling him, and you can probably move him right now as like a fringe wide receiver 20 price tag. He's going to be a boomer bust option. He has 4 games with 16 plus points and then 4 games with 7 or fewer points. That's just where we're at here with Gabriel Davis. So I just think this is a spot where you have to, kind of evaluate yourself as a fantasy player. If you're someone who really hates uncertainty, you don't like the boom bust nature of Gabe Davis, you're not going to start him on a week-to-week basis, then he is someone I would pivot off of. So he's kind of just someone where I'm throwing out the idea that there is a window to sell here, because with Gabriel Davis, he's the type of guy where you never want to buy him after a big game and you never want to sell him after a down game. Even if you're panicking internally, you know he's going to have one of those boom games soon, like he did here in week 11. So if you were panicking, you should probably still be concerned, if that's what you were feeling originally. So I do think this would be the opportunity to move Gabe Davis if you are interested in that. And then the fourth and final sell high player, we have Rondale Moore. And I believe Rondale Moore is going to be a great win now piece, but I think he is a top sell high for some of the top teams in your league. The 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, the teams that are locked in for the playoffs. The last 3 weeks, Rondale Moore has just been a straight up stud. 23.4 points, 14.9, and then 18.4 PPR points. In that 3-game stretch, he has 31 total targets. And I think that for however long Marquise Brown is out, I think Rondale Moore is probably like a top 24 play, if not, at worst, a high-end wide receiver 3 moving forward. So I'm not someone who's like anti-Rondale Moore. I think he is going to be a great play over the next few weeks. However, when Marquise Brown returns, I kind of feel like Rondale Moore is going to be unstartable. This is a Cardinals offense that just heavily targets 2 wide receivers. We saw it early in the season. It was Marquise Brown, Greg Dortch. Then, it was DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore. It's been a spot where we see 2 wide receivers used very heavily, and then it's like kind of unlikely that we see a third guy get super involved. So once Marquise Brown is back, we know Marquise Brown is the more talented wide receiver. I think it's going to be D-Hop. I think it's going to be Marquise Brown. And that's not to say that Rondale Moore is going to do nothing and he's just going to sit on the bench. But in terms of being fantasy relevant, he's just not someone I think is going to be someone you want to start once Brown is back in the lineup with DeAndre Hopkins. So when we're looking at Marquise Brown's injury, I think the original kind of timetable was around 6 weeks. So that 6-week mark would be week 12. So that would be, he's returning after this week, which is going to be week 11. The Cardinals do have a week 13 bye. So I think it probably, makes some sense. Maybe they play it safe. They, don't want to rush him back in week 12. They take the bye. He returns in week 14. In my opinion, that seems to be the most logical and most likely date that Marquise Brown does come back in week 14. So I do think that Rondale Moore could really help out a team that's kind of on the edge of making the playoffs. They need the wins now. He can give that fringe team 2 or 3 really strong starts, until Marquise Brown comes back. But if you're a team who's sitting there at 8-2, 7-3, 9-1, and you're not desperate for wins right now, he's someone I would move off of because I think you can get a pretty decent return right now, but in a few weeks his value may be non-existent. And if he's someone who's barely cracking your lineup, I just think it makes total sense to move him, as soon as you can and sell high after this hot stretch he's gone on. So a player that I do think is talented. I just think when Marquise Brown returns, it's not going to be great news for Rondale Moore's fantasy value. So those are going to be my 4 sell high players: Raheem Mostert, Devin Singletary, Gabriel Davis, and Rondale Moore. Remember, you're not giving away these guys for, just anything. You want to make solid trades, but if the opportunities do present themselves, I think, it's a solid strategy to pivot off of these players. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you guys a ton for stopping by, and I'll see you guys in the next one.